Self-doubt is a voice in your head that says you can't do it, so don't try. It's an anchor that keeps us from ever reaching our potential. Self-doubt, we end up like this guy right here. I don't know if you know what movie this is or even who this is, but a famous quote, famous Hollywood quote came from this movie. Marlon Brando, On the Waterfront, 1954. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. I don't even know what he did or what was going on in the movie, but what I do know, just based upon that quote, is that Marlon Brando was living a life of regret, of what could have been. He could have been somebody, but he wasn't. That's the end result of self-doubt. So the person we're looking at today wrestled with self-doubt. As a matter of fact, it's Moses, the great leader of Israel. That's how we see Moses today, the deliverer, the one who took the Israelite slaves from Egypt through the desert to the promised land. But it almost didn't end up that way. See, Moses, when he was first given the commissioning by God, the opportunity to be this leader, his knee-jerk first reaction was, I can't. As a matter of fact, after God has this burning bush and reveals to Moses his plan for Moses' life, Moses makes 5 statements. And in those 5 statements are 5 excuses, a lot of people call it, but I see them as hurdles. I see it as Moses wrestling with the 5 hurdles of self-doubt. And I think that these hurdles that Moses wrestled with in the book of Exodus, right after God gave him his commissioning, if you will, we all wrestle with in some way, shape, or form. So I want to take just a couple moments and go over them with you right now. The first one comes from Exodus chapter 3, verse 11. God had just revealed his plan to Moses, and Moses' first reaction was, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I? Why me? Why'd you choose me to do this? This is the hurdle of inadequacy, where we feel like we're inadequate. We're not good enough to do the job. And a lot of times when we go to a new position, or especially if we're getting promoted and it's a new higher job with a greater responsibility, there's this feeling of inadequacy that we get. I had a commander that once told me, and every time he takes on a new position, goes to a new place, he just hears this voice that says, you're just Bill from Cleveland. I changed his name to protect the innocent, but it said, you're just Bill from Cleveland. You can't do this. You're just a dumb city kid. That's the hurdle of inadequacy. That's that voice in our head that says we can't. And so that's where Moses was. But God said, no, Moses. You're my man. I want you to do this. I want no part of any of these feelings of self-doubt. Next thing out of Moses' mouth, he encountered another hurdle in Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. He said, suppose I go to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, well, what is his name? What do I tell them? So Moses is basically saying here, I don't know enough. I'm not quite ready. I need to be in the oven a little bit more. I need to learn a little bit more. Not quite ready. This is the hurdle of perfection. In other words, I'm not going to move until I'm completely 100% every I dotted and T crossed. There's a proverb in the Bible, Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 4, that says, farmers who wait for perfect weather never plant. If they watch every crowd, they never harvest. There's always going to be something that you don't know or can't do or not quite ready for in order for you to move on. And Moses was locked in here at this hurdle of perfection. But God would want no part of it and said, no, Moses, you're my man. I want you to do this. You're the guy. So the next thing out of Moses' mouth was the third hurdle. If the first hurdle was the hurdle of inadequacy, and the second hurdle was the hurdle of perfection, check out the third hurdle, where Moses says, well, what if they don't believe me or they don't listen to me? Exodus chapter 4, verse 1. In other words, what if I lead and they don't follow? Hurdle number 3 is the hurdle of rejection, where it's personal, where it's not about what I don't know or, or anything like that, a talent that I lack. It's me they reject. And rejection is painful. And rejection is a part of the everyday existence of a recruiter. Most of the time when they reach out to somebody, they're going to get rejected. Okay? Someone joining the Army is the exception to the rule. And so they need to deal with this hurdle of rejection daily, recruiters do. And it's painful because rejection hurts. And that's where Moses was at. What if I'm rejected? But God said, no, Moses, you're the man and I want you to do this. But Moses had more excuses, and so he kept going. And he said, but God, I've never been eloquent. I'm slow of speech and tongue, in Exodus chapter 4, verse 10. Here's the fourth excuse. Here's the fourth hurdle of self-doubt. I call it the hurdle of the big zit. The hurdle of the big zit, or the hurdle of the magnified flaw. It's that gorgeous, cute, high school girl, smart, spiritual, compassionate, has everything in the book, wakes up one morning with a zit on her face, and all of a sudden she's now nothing and can't do anything right. I can't go to school, I can't lead, I can't do anything because of a darn zit on her face. But it becomes so big in her eyes that it just overwhelms everything else. And a lot of leaders wrestle with this because maybe they have one tragic flaw or an Achilles heel. I knew a leader that was very self-conscious and questioned themselves as a leader because they couldn't run fast. Or maybe they couldn't speak like Moses was saying here. Or I don't have a lot of charisma. This hurdle of the big zit keeps people from reaching out. Keeps people from reaching their potential. Keeps people from stepping forward. And it almost did with Moses, but God wouldn't want any part of it. He said, no, Moses, you are the man for the job. I want you to do this. But Moses wasn't done. He had one last attempt, one last hurdle that he needed to overcome, one last excuse. What? The first one, hurdle of inadequacy. Second one, hurdle of perfection. Third one, hurdle of rejection. Fourth one, the hurdle of the big zit. This fifth one, in Exodus chapter 4, verse 13, Moses says, Lord, send somebody else. Just send somebody else. I'm not really interested. I just don't want to do it. I'll just stay here and deal with the sheep, and I've become pretty good, proficient at that. I'll just do that. This is the hurdle of motivation. Sometimes you get used to being on the couch, or sometimes you get used to the suck. You've embraced it for so long, or sometimes you can become happy with, I could have been. That's good enough for you. And maybe that was growing good enough for Moses, but God would have no part of it. He said, no, Moses, no hurdle of inadequacy is going to stop you. No hurdle of perfection, no hurdle of rejection, big zit, or motivation is going to stop you. You are the man for the job. And Moses almost pushed out of the nest, left his comfort zone, and became the Moses we all know today. As I close this up, there's four things I want you to remember from this message. Number one is that everybody wrestles with the 5 hurdles. I don't care what kind of facade, mask, tough exterior you have, everybody wrestles. I've talked to enough leaders who've kind of revealed their heart to me and, their feelings upon taking leadership that, I'm not surprised anymore to hear somebody struggling with self-doubt. I bet you MacArthur struggled. George Washington struggled. Schwarzkopf struggled with self-doubt. I think they all did. Number 2, very important, and this is why I did this lesson. If you can see it, you can kill it. Now you are able to identify that voice when you hear it, or you're able to identify that hurdle when you see it. Be ready for it. Cross over it when you hear it. Number 3, those hurdles, even though you think you crossed it, they come back up. The hurdles of self-doubt are like whack-a-mole. You get it down, you think it's dead. All of a sudden you wake up and there's another zit on your face. Or all of a sudden you hear the voice of rejection again saying, you know what, people aren't going to listen to you today. You will constantly wrestle against that voice of rejection or inadequacy or whatever it might be, that hurdle of self-doubt. Which brings me to the fourth and final point. And that is, find a louder voice. The voice of self-doubt is relentless and it can be loud. Find a louder one. Find a voice that will compel you or push you forward, that's louder than the voice that says stay where you are. For Moses, I think that louder voice was two things. Number one, I think it was the promises of God. No, I think it was, maybe those times where he questioned himself or his adequacy as a leader, he fell back on the promises of God and the commissioning of God, and he felt the call of God. But number two, if you look in the book of Exodus, God gives Moses Aaron to breathe life into him during those weak times. Maybe to be a cheerleader, to speak for him when he couldn't speak. Maybe when that voice of self-doubt was getting really loud for Moses, it was Aaron. No, Moses, you are the man for the job. So find a louder voice. Maybe for you it can be the promises of God. Maybe your spouse can be someone at work. Or maybe, you know what? Maybe you can be that voice for somebody else. Maybe you can be that cheerleader. Maybe you can be that louder voice that can compel somebody to cross over a hurdle of self-doubt when they are struggling because they need it. And so these are the 5 hurdles of self-doubt. And these are 4 principles that will help you through them. Remember, everybody wrestles with them. Number 1, if you can see it, you can kill it. Number 2, the hurdles come back, so be ready for them to come back. Number 3. And then number 4, and most importantly, find a louder voice. Go do that for yourself. Do it for somebody else. Walk in peace and have the best day possible.